Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this unique class for the last 4 weeks. So here we are, a last day of our class, The Anxious Generation, where the thesis is this. By the way, we'll have less interaction, like passing the microphone, that kind of thing, through much of the class, but toward the end, the last 15, 20 minutes or so, we're going to actually ask you to take out your cell phone and do a poll. Do 6 polls. In fact, we're going to get your live feedback about some of the issues that are raised in this last part of the book. The main thesis of the book, as we've said in the past, is this. The reason the anxious generation is the anxious generation, that is Generation Z, those born after 1995, is for these 2 things. These 2 reasons, that there has been a case of overprotection in the real world and underprotection in the virtual world.
And last week we talked about how social media, gaming, and porn have been really harmful to boys and girls. We talked about how disproportionately social media has affected girls harmfully, and disproportionately porn and gaming boys, but how across the board it's been a problem. And we talked about the absolute necessity of the synchronous, in-person community that we all sorely need, and then reviewed Haidt's ideas about spiritual disintegration.
This is a pretty thick book, and of course we've raced through it in 4 weeks. Originally we mapped out 8 weeks of this class, but then we decided we wouldn't do it upstairs, we'd do it in here and make it shorter over the holiday break. So we're racing through a really dense book in 4 weeks, and today racing through the last 4 chapters. Chapter 9 is about the challenge of collective action, because collective action is really hard. So 2010, when smartphones and social media became common accessories, we didn't understand the harm that they could cause. It's as if someone said, hey, we'd like to invite your children to travel to Mars. And you say, okay, you can take them to Mars. This is the introduction to the book, as you may recall, without realizing all the consequences of life on Mars, that we may never see them again. They may not survive on Mars. We just bought into the whole smartphone thing in 2010 without realizing the harms it would cause. But now that we do know, now that Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all these other social platforms, they've known all along, actually. But now that we do know, is it possible to reverse the effects, the negative effects of a smartphone in your child's hands? The parents will often say, well, it's too late. That ship has sailed. I've lost my child. We talked about that on week 1. But the answer is, it is possible to reverse the negative effects, but only through collective action. And here are 4 new norms that he proposes. You've heard these before too. 1, no smartphones before high school. Wait till 9th grade or 10th grade, depending on how they define high school where you live. No smartphones before high school. 2, no social media before the age of 16. Number 3, phone-free schools. And when the governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders got a hold of this book and sent it to the 49 other governors of U.S. states. Recently, she was shown, I think on Facebook, was it? You sent me the picture where she's pictured with Jonathan Haidt, the author of this book, proud of the book, and that's why she's initiated a 3-day process whereby we eliminate cell phones in public schools. You're smiling.
Yes, she has done some good things for public schools.
Yeah, Rachel's not a fan because of the other things that the governor has enacted on public schools, but that's not something we'll debate here.
We can talk about that another time.
Yeah, that'll be the next class, next Christmas. The LEARNS Act and all that. More independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world, which we'll spend a lot of time talking about today.
So we're going to not spend much time on this for hopefully obvious reasons. There's not much we can all do about what tech companies and governments do, right? But just to kind of give you a review of what Haidt suggests. So what governments and tech companies can do now, how can we consume as much of your time and attention as possible is sort of the tech companies thing. So there have been lots of quotes that have come out in these court battles that have been going around the last few years with social media specifically. And there was Sean Parker, was a former president of Facebook, and he was kind of being pretty open and honest about what their processes are. Of course, Meta, which now owns, I think, Instagram, Facebook, I'm not sure what else they own, probably a lot. And he said, we need to give you a little bit of dopamine because someone liked or commented on a photo or post. It's social validation feedback loop. You're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. We understood this consciously and we did it anyway. So again, describing the processes of the Facebook marketing team.
We understood this consciously and we did it anyway. The most surprising thing about this next slide to me, Tristan Harris, former ethicist at Google. That's the most surprising thing about that line. I'm pleased though that the company, Google, knew they needed an ethicist. Now, I don't know what to read into the fact that he's the former ethicist at Google. I'm thinking because of what he created later, that he created this Center for Humane Technology that he was realizing. I don't know if any of you read Neil Postman's book, Technopoly, a long time ago. Anybody know the book Technopoly? Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death, and then the book Technopoly. No? Okay, never mind. That's too old. That's like me quoting old movies. But anyway, Technopoly, basically the point of Neil Postman's book Technopoly is technology will take on a life of its own. And once it starts, you can't stop it, which is why I appreciate in some ways the Amish who say we're going to use dowels and hand tools, because once you go down that road, it doesn't stop. The technology will eventually inculcate in your head a worldview that the technology produced, and then you won't be able to escape it. Anyway, that's too much information, but he could see what was happening and began this thing called the Center for Humane Technology. He says social media companies are stuck in a collective action problem themselves. That is, they themselves who create social media platforms know this, that they're locked in this race to the bottom. By race to the bottom, he means by that, because if one of them fails to exploit this available psychological weakness, because we have this psychological weakness that we want it, we want that post we just made to be liked. We want to be liked so bad, we'll post another one just to incentivize getting more likes, because we get a dopamine rush from that, and then we get more likes. They know this about us, and if we say, well, that would be unscrupulous on our part if we organized our social media platform, if we built it that way, then we won't do it. But then our competitors will do it, and they'll make more money than us, so we do it anyway. They have their own collective action problem.
So, Tristan, technology has infused itself at a very intimate level with how we form our identity, how we form relationships, how we make choices, and make sense of the world. Social media and the smartphone have allowed the influence and manipulation of human biases and weaknesses. They can overwhelm our psychology in ways we simply aren't aware of. The prevalent business models in technology are entirely based on manipulating human weakness.
The Facebook whistleblower, we mentioned Frances Haugen. She showed 4 ways that, about the ways that Facebook was trying to reach pre-teens. And this is why she was the whistleblower. She called them on it, that they were attracting users by not enforcing age limits. Your child had to be 13, but they could just type in and say, yes, I'm 13, but they had no way to verify whether or not your child was 13 or not. And so there they are, using this social media platform. That they used AI, early forms of AI, I assume, to determine what to put in users' feeds to hold their attention. In other words, the algorithms that are now famous that incentivize users to keep uploading, that's what I was referring to, that you like the likes so much that you post new content so you get more likes. That's what Frances Haugen said they knew. They knew, and that's why she's called a whistleblower, just because she called them on it.
All right, so again, what can governments and tech companies do? We can't do much, but write our, senators, and who knows how effective that is. But Haidt has some recommendations for that. He calls a duty of care. He says tech companies and governments do have a responsibility here. He suggests they ought to raise the age of internet adulthood to age 16 and enforce that reliably. Facilitate more reliable, intensive age verification, which I think would be really good, as they do have age verification now, but I think we all know it's kind of a joke. Encourage phone-free schools, which we're going to get back to.
What do you mean it's kind of a joke now?
So I think we all know you can just say, yes, I'm 13 or whatever, right? You can just say, or whatever platform it is, even if it's pornographic sites, that you have to be 18, but you can just say, I'm 18, right? That's how it works.
And a child has there's no ID, there's no way to verify them with some sort of official ID. So that's one thing. What could tech companies do? What could governments do about tech companies? How governments could encourage more real world experience? Part of the equation from Jonathan Haidt is we need less protection in the real world. And partly because of social media, because of 24-hour news, we are so familiar, because of Amber Alerts, we're so familiar with the possibility that child might be kidnapped. And now we live in fear that your child will be snatched at Walmart if your child gets away from you at Walmart. And I'm not, am I? I don't mean to minimize that. But has that whole my child might be kidnapped thing been overplayed? Are we overly nervous about that possibility? So that nowadays we might be, if we leave our children at Berry Hill Park to play by themselves while you go to the grocery store, and I'm not talking about 5-year-olds. I'm talking about, kids who are old enough to play in the park, at least when we were kids, that you might be called a negligent parent. Could we then lobby to define neglect differently in this day and age, allowing and encourage children to play outside on their own within reason, without consequences for parents? Because there have been cases where parents are called to court because people have accused them of being negligent. Can we encourage more free play time as part of the school day? Now, some of you who teach music or you teach art in schools, you're thinking, well, there it goes. They're going to take away art to incorporate more recess in school. I can tell you that my students would love it if I took a break every 30 minutes and we had recess, and they're in college. But I don't know what you'd say about that. What happens to art and music if you build in more, and you're a high school, not a...
I do know that recess is so limited now. I'm looking at Bethany. How much recess do y'all have?
40 minutes. There's a law. You have to have 40 minutes a day.
Okay.
That's the minimum? Okay. Do you feel pressure to cut into recess time?
We call it it has to be free play. The teacher can't even say we're all going to play dodgeball right now. They have choice of what they're doing.
Oh, good.
And they have to have movement available.
We encourage that. More free play at time. Design and zone public spaces that children can navigate more easily, such as better sidewalks, crosswalks, traffic lights, etc. I'm not sure how, I don't think Matt Faulkner is here this morning, but I'm not sure how friendly Cersei is with crosswalks and sidewalks and so forth. But they have a point there. If your child is just walking down the street instead of walking down a sidewalk, I can understand why you would feel less comfortable with that. And then more vocational education, apprenticeships, and youth development programs. In other words, we ought to have shop class again. How many of you had shop class when you were growing up? Now, look around you with the age. There's a certain age group here represented, a certain generation represented by those of us who had shop class. I didn't.
You're all so old.
I don't know why
That's
I didn't have shop class. We had shop class in my school, but I didn't go for whatever reason, and I don't know how to do stuff. I'm not as handy as my father was. Why, from your point of view as a high school guidance counselor, why is that so important? So
I will say we have a lot of programs like this at BB High School where you can, we have ag, Intro to Ag, Survey of Ag. So we do the shop welding. There's a whole welding floor. We have a lot of these kinds of things, and they're vital for keeping interest, especially for boys. I hate that that's the stereotype, but it's true. Boys who they do not want to be in the classroom. They would much rather be working with their hands, and they love going to welding class. It keeps kids in school. And now we bus kids to ASU Searcy, actually. For half the day, they can take English and math with us, and then they can go to ASU Searcy and go ahead and get their welding classes done while they're in high school. So that's something that is growing, I think. Okay. Programs like that. Yeah. All right, so what schools can do now, again, there's not much we can do about this, but there's actually more. We have more power as citizens over this than we do over governments and tech companies. I think I mentioned on the first day that BB High School, and I know this is a growing conversation across the nation, but I know that a lot of school districts sent out surveys to their staff and their parents about phone policy, because Sarah Huckabee Sanders is trying to encourage phone-free schools based on this book. And I know Hot Springs School District went totally phone-free, a couple others in Arkansas, but they did survey our parents, and I think I mentioned that our staff was 99% in favor of completely phone-free schools, and our parents were almost completely flipped. They acknowledged in the survey that there was a problem, but that no, they would not support phone-free schools. And so this is something that we need to reckon with as a community. So what schools can do now, he says we can make schools phone-free and build in more time for free play. You can see the blue statewide legislation has been introduced about phone-free policies. You can see there's a statewide ban, and you see some of those like California, Florida. I think one of the things that's so interesting to me is that this is bipartisan, right? I'm looking here at red states and blue states, and when is the last time we saw something move this quickly that was bipartisan? Yeah. Right? Like this is a big thing. This is a big enough problem that the governor of California and the governor of Florida is saying we've got to ban phones from the schools. I don't think they're the same politically. You're right, Dad. That's the point I was making. Thank you. All right, so so the next slide. So what schools can do now, why a classroom ban doesn't work. So at BB High School, because of our parent feedback, we did not do a phone ban, and we did what's called classroom bans, and we're going to talk about why that doesn't work. Students still use them between classes and to disengage socially. I'm telling you, one of the saddest things I see is walking through the hallway past the lunchroom, and all of our kids are literally sitting in lunchroom tables looking at devices, not talking to each other, sometimes literally texting each other across the table about somebody else at the table. I get bumped into 10 times in the hallway because kids are looking at their screen and they're not paying attention. This is going to sound silly, but the frequent bathroom break situation has been pretty insane. So even though they're banned in class, I probably have 5 to 6 kids per class period asking me to go to the bathroom, and I say, okay, leave your phone. And they're like, never mind, I don't need to go. Yeah. Seriously. So that's been something we've noticed in education. If you have a classroom ban, they find ways to use their phone anyway, because they are completely addicted, as are we all. For the first time, this semester, I've taught 34 years. For the first time this semester, I told students they may not use their phones in class, and if you do need to get up and go to the bathroom, you cannot take your phone. I don't have a punitive measure built in. I also say I'm not going to use my phone during class. But I don't have anything punitive built in, but if I see them get up and walk out with their phone, I'm going to call them up after class, not in front of everybody. I'm going to say, I saw that you went to the bathroom and you had your phone in your hand. Next time, don't go. But this semester, I've had 150 students in 2 classes. I've seen almost no one get up and go to the bathroom at all. So amazingly, this also contributes to bladder control. Who would have thought that this had a causal relationship? So, and this is just any high school teacher specifically, and I'm hearing like these same complaints younger and younger. I'm hearing some of our elementary school teachers say they have some of these same problems, which is pretty incredible, right? But especially high school teachers will tell you that the phones are such a problem in class, policing them is a full-time job. So at BB High School, cell phone policing consumes so much of our time and energy, it's insane. And I will say, so I only teach a couple classes a month because I do seminars with our students about post-secondary kind of plans. And I've never, in 15 years I've been doing this, I've never had this many kind of discipline problems. And it's always a phone. It's a child looking at their phone under the desk, thinking I don't see, and I have to do the whole, it is so disruptive. Not only that, but a study by UNESCO in August of 2023 showed how classroom technology is detracting from educational performance. I think we're all seeing we're lowering our rigor because we have to, because kids can't perform at the level they once did. And I'm telling you, you would think these devices, people talk about these cell phones can be good for learning, and there are some ways that that's true, but just being able to Google something has not made kids perform better. In fact, what it's done is made them worse problem solvers. I think I mentioned that, whenever I'm doing a lot of post-secondary follow-up with students, I'm shocked by literally, they'll come in and they'll say, I need to do the FAFSA. And I'll say, okay, Google, do the FAFSA. And then they'll Google it and it'll say, complete the FAFSA at the top. And they'll look at me like, okay, what do I do now? And I'll say, okay, click, complete the FAFSA. There's a big green button that says start the new form. And they'll go, okay, what do I do now? But these are smart kids who do not know how to solve the most basic problems.
Yeah, real problem. This is all, by the way, in chapter 10.
Yeah, so it is important to say, Jonathan Haidt says, because of these things, a phone ban in the classroom is useless. It's not going to accomplish. There's a reason that he is saying it's a ban or nothing, and any educator will tell you, if we don't just ban them from school. And just to kind of add, we're not saying you can't bring your phone. Have y'all heard about lock pouches? A lot of concerts, a lot of music artists are enforcing this because they're sick of the phones in their concerts. But it's a lock bag, and you literally put your phone in the lock bag. It locks at, say, 8 a.m. You cannot unlock it until 3, right? But you keep it on your person all day. So we're not taking your phone. But there's lots of little policies like this where we could be implementing them in the schools.
Another part of this chapter 10, what schools can do is allow more time for free play at a minimum of 40 minutes. He doesn't say that, but I just heard that from Bethany. Longer recess, more frequent, shorter recesses. How about they open their school playgrounds half an hour before school starts? Do we do that? Your school?
They're open anytime students are not present. They have to be open.
How about that? That's a law? That's a policy, or that's your policy?
I know in our district, we unlock all the gates to playgrounds.
Ours is too.
I think it is a policy. We are
good.
supposed to serve the public.
State of Arkansas is way ahead. We're way ahead of other states on this. How about a free play club after school hours on the playground? What are these kids otherwise going home to? We used to call them latchkey kids. What are they going home to now? What if they stayed and had all this free play in this safe environment of an after school, of a playground, a school playground? That would be cool. And then back to the shop class, re-engage boys, especially with more vocational education, hiring more male teachers. We were at a program the other night at Sidney Diener where I'm seeing the Thompsons here, where they have a son, we have a grandson that attend there. And our Sarah is she the chairman of the PTO? She's president of the PTO, and you're like the vice. So we have them right here from Sidney Diener. And there's Glenn Knabe, who has taught for us at Harding before, has a doctor of ministry degree, and he's teaching elementary school, which is just wonderful. How about more male bus drivers? Dr. Thompson, he's another male who's a male role model presence in driving a public school bus. Anyway, we need more, and also those of you who are obsessive compulsive about grammar.
Yes, we see that there's not
like
another parentheses. I knew that you were going to call that out, Dad. I'm sorry.
I apologize. There's not an end, a closed parentheses.
My fault.
Some of you. Anyway, we're going to do a poll. This is where we actually say, take out your phone. This is an important part of this new cell phone policy we have, and Beth and I teach a class together at Harding too. This is an important policy we have there is sometimes we do a poll right there live in class. So switch over. So we have several of these. We have 6 of these polls, not back to back, but we want to hear what you have to say. This is going to require use of a cell phone. We'll see if this actually shows up on the screen. But the question is, I believe schools should ban cell phones during the school day, not just during...
Is there something behind us?
Does it say it up there? We just can't see it on ours. Oh, well, there you are. It's not showing in the middle. So you just click on menti.com. The question, as it's posed here on the Mentimeter slide, has to be shorter. A limited number of words. So, schools should ban cell phones during the day, not just during classes. That thing we just talked about. How many of you strongly agree? Agree? I don't know. Disagree? Strongly disagree? So far, it looks pretty overwhelming that at least this crowd agrees this would be a good policy. So if you are ever asked by your school, if it's Harding Academy, if it's a Searcy Public School or anywhere, if you're asked the question, remember what you said here, that at least a lot of your peers in church said we should strongly agree that we should ban cell phones in schools. Rachel?
And I was going to add, like, one thing that I know parents say is, what if a disaster, I mentioned this in the first class, a lot of parents will say, what if a tragedy happens on campus and I can't get a hold of my kid? And what any police force will tell you, that would be the worst time for kids to have cell phones. If kids have cell phones during that time, can you imagine the chaos of a bunch of parents trying to come up to the school? Police officers would say the safest thing for a kid is not to have a device to listen to the adult in the room in a scenario like that.
You know, this is completely anonymous. So if you strongly disagree, you can say you strongly disagree, and we're not going to know. But you are going to have to tell your spouse on the way home that you strongly disagreed, and then you'll have an argument. So, okay, that's a pretty good number. You can keep doing this as long as you know that number. You can keep doing this, and we'll look at the final result. Let's toggle back for now, back to the next slide, and talk about this book. Jonathan Haidt mentions another book by Alison Gopnik, which I first learned about from my Sarah, and then I went and bought the book because I thought this sounds important. The difference between parenting like being a carpenter and parenting like being a gardener. The difference is that parenting as carpentry, that means you think as a parent you have a blueprint, you measure twice, you cut once. There's a certain pattern for raising kids. So if you raise them like this, in fact, I could quote a passage, raise up a child in the way they should go. When they're old, they will not depart from it. Foolproof, we thought. Then we had 3 children, and they were all different.
Wonderful.
They were all wonderful, that's true. But we were pretty surprised at how different our kids were. First one came out, I'm saying this in front of the first one, Beth is the one who says this. Mom says this. She says she came out with a cigar coming out of her mouth saying, this is how it's going to be. And then
Thanks, guys.
Child number 2 came out, and he loved going to bed. I mean, from an early age, he was like, could I just go to bed, please? Before he could talk, and he would go to bed. This one hated going to bed. She was born with a severe case of FOMO, fear of missing out. There's a new thing like that. Anyway, but we thought of parenting as carpentry. We're going to parent everybody in the same way. You know, kids are a little bit different personality-wise. We're going to parent the same way. We'll get the same product, and it's going to look like this. Basically, it's going to look like the ideal versions of ourselves. We had not yet achieved the ideal versions of ourselves. We still have not achieved yet the ideal versions of ourselves, but Alison Gopnik makes the case that what if parenting is actually more like gardening? Create a certain environment for your children, and then in that environment you water and cultivate in such a way that they can thrive even though all your children are different. It's just something to think about, and Haidt references that, which it's made us think this is relevant here as well.
In this section of the book, Haidt goes through the different ages based on this kind of idea of gardening and carpentry, and talks about what he recommends, what psychologists recommend for different age groups. For 0 to 5, how can parents help children thrive? They need a basis for secure attachment to their parents. Remember, we talked about embodiment last week, the necessity of sitting together at a meal. I know we've all had the experience even of being at restaurants and looking over and seeing a whole family on a device, on a personal device, and how sad that is for us to see. They need interaction with other kids and other loving adults in the real world. So the idea of being in community, I've mentioned I love this little neighborhood our Airbnb was in for a while, that was the kids were always out together playing all the time. Groups of adults on Halloween taking their kids together, right? I feel like we've lost, we talked about this in a recent class, but the idea that an adult can no longer feel comfortable correcting another person's child out in public, right? That used to be a really important part of being community for each other, is having multiple eyes, right, out on a child. So bringing that back, they need us to resist the urge to optimize every minute of their day. So every minute doesn't have to be structured or educational. It is not our job to entertain our kids all the time, right? They need to be entertaining themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
His specific guidelines for screen time, and I want to just say, I have never had biological children, so I have never dealt with that 0 to 5 age group, and I can only imagine how exhausting it would be, and that I would be so tempted, like everyone else, to just put them in front of a screen to get a moment of peace. So this feels kind of hypocritical for me to be sharing. But until 18 months, he says, only video chatting with familiar adults like grandparents. There should be no other screen time at all unless there is a grandparent video chat. 18 to 24 months, all screen time limited to educational programming with an adult caregiver present the whole time. So we're not leaving our kid in the other room to watch whatever, but we're sitting with them. Maybe they have their little iPad they're borrowing, but we're there with them, engaging in the content. 2 to 5, no more than 1 hour of screen time per weekday. I have cousins who say no screen time at all during the week, and those kids are always playing outside and super creative. All ages, no screens during family meals or outings, no screens as pacifiers or to resolve tantrums. I think we can all understand how that would be pretty detrimental psychologically. No screens in bedrooms, I think, is a pretty important one.
That's a good one for adults too, by the way. Mm-hmm. We're not going to come inspect your household to see if you have a TV in your bedroom. You ought to watch TV on purpose, because we're going to watch this thing on TV instead of just watching TV as you go to sleep and you're watching it just accidentally. Not a good idea. I'm talking to the adults here. We ought to break that habit. We ought to get the TV out of our bedrooms.
It is so tempting, though.
Am I meddling here?
So nice. A little. Okay, he also talks about what parents can do ages 6 through 13 to continue in helping them thrive. Practice letting your kids out of your sight without having a way to reach you. I know this is probably a scary thought. Encourage sleepovers and don't micromanage them. This one's trickier for me, and I want to just give this little caveat and say I have a very close friend in Memphis. It's actually Landon's sister-in-law who tried to have a slumber party. And it was this idea of like, we're going to bring back the old slumber party. It was at their house, so it felt safe. But then some drama escalated from their slumber party because all the other kids had phones there, right? And so this is a tricky thing. You know, when we're having sleepovers with other kids that have devices, I know even from my own past experience, there are some things that can go on there. So we do want to be cautious to some degree, making sure that we're having sleepovers with other families that we really trust, right? Which I think is pretty important. Encourage walking to school in a group, I think is pretty cool. After school hours are for free play. I think we told you that mom used to lock us out for 2 hours after, literally, and we'd kind of try to go back in and say we had to go to the bathroom. She said, no, you don't. You just want to come back in. And we literally play in Harding Park for hours with our friends, with Landon and his gang. So, so go camping. This is pretty cool. Send them to a traditional sleepaway camp. Send them to Camp Dakota or Camp Wildwood. Camp Dakota, sorry, Brian. And form friendly childhood neighborhoods and playgrounds. I'm just kidding. All sleepaway camps are great. Truly, he talks a lot in the book about sleepaway camps and how they're dying because a lot of parents don't want to send their kids to a place where they can't be reached. But places like Camp Dakota and Camp Wildwood, think about developmentally how incredible that is for a kid. To go somewhere for a week or 2 weeks away from parents with trusted adults, other friends, playing outside all day, eating copious amounts of sugar, right? It's wonderful developmentally. And he talks about how parents are too afraid now to let their kids be out of reach. That's a huge mistake. All right, so specific guidelines for screens, 6 through 13. Here's what Haidt suggests. Learn how to use parental controls. He recommends commonsensemedia.com. I think this is pretty good.
How many of you have heard of Common Sense Media? Okay, well, you have now if you haven't before, commonsensemedia.com.
Focus more on maximizing in-person activity and sleep than on screens. I think this is important. Provide clear structure to screen time each week. So I think we do this in our house. So it's really important, I think, to have a certain time limit and to really stick to it, I think. And we have an app that cuts it off automatically. So you can set it on the app and say, whatever it is that they're on, we'll just quit after an hour or whatever time you set. More specific guidelines, consider a digital Sabbath, 1 day a week, 1 week a year, and while on family vacations. This is a growing call on social media to say, hey, don't bring your devices on family vacations at all. Watch for signs of addiction and problematic usage, and Haidt goes more into detail about what that entails, but we could all pretty much figure that out. Delay social media till 16. We've talked about that. Talk with preteens about the risks of screens and listen to what they have to say about it. we're not just doing this and saying, and we don't want to hear about it. We're having conversations that are open with our kids, right?
What about the minivan or the SUV that's got screens but just built into the back of the front passenger seat, the driver's seat?
I think Haidt would say no on that. But again, it's very easy for us to say because we are not parenting
small children. Long road trip. But I wonder how many kids don't know how to play I Spy with My Little Eye anymore.
It's a really hard game to learn.
It's a hard game to learn?
No, it's not.
Oh, I thought you were being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Wonder where she learned that.
Okay.
Let's take another poll about some of that, about taking a digital Sabbath. We're going to toggle over to Mentimeter again, but the question is, we'll have to go down here so we can read it. I'm willing to commit to taking a digital Sabbath, no cell phones or screens. Your options are 1 day a week, as long as it's not Saturday during college football season. 1 day a month. 1 week a year. Some say maybe. 13 of you were brave enough to say nope. 14, a growing number. But look, 101 of you have said, yeah, I'd think about doing that 1 day a week. 61 of you said 1 day a month. And according to Bob Ritchie, there are 579 of you in the room.
We also should go on record as saying these are very unscientific polls because we've told you what you should do. This is the epitome of social pressure.
Sure it is.
So I want to acknowledge that.
But this is also, we're using social pressure to take collective action in a more positive way. But yeah, it is a little manipulative, probably.
But thank you for your honesty.
Let's go to the next ones. As a family unit, we will charge our phones in a common space at certain hours of the day.
So one of the things that we have seen in some suggestions would be to everyone in the family charges their phone outside of their rooms, including parents. At a certain time, there's a block maybe in the living room or somewhere, and at 9 p.m., everyone's phone goes on that charging block. And then they're not available again until the next morning at 6 or whatever is a suggestion that could be helpful.
In case that's too small, you'll say, I'm in. I'll start tonight. We'll start charging our phones in a common space. Or second possibility is I'm willing to try it in the future, but maybe not now. Third option, no way, that ain't happening. Fourth option, I'll try it, but I don't think my family members will participate. You're throwing your family members under the bus right here in front of everyone. 578 more people. And 23, there is no option there. I don't see what that option is.
For a long time, my husband and our excuse was, well, we use our cell phones for our alarm. And then we had that moment of like, oh, you can buy an alarm clock. And my husband bought an alarm clock that I hate. But we stopped doing this, and we need to go back to it. Yeah.
Let's finish toggling. Instead of toggling,
we can do that.
Go back. Let's just go ahead.
Can I throw a question out there?
Yeah.
Just kind of like a practical question for me with this one in particular is because most of us, actually I have no way of knowing how many of us, but so many households don't have landlines anymore.
Yeah.
We had an issue with being on a youth trip, a kid, we weren't sure if they needed to go to the hospital, and their parents were doing this. And so we could not get a hold of a parent in the middle of the night. And I like the idea, but I'm also, I don't think it's a reason to shut it down, but I need a workaround to find a way, like when I need to get an emergency notification, how can I do that without having the same disruption as having my cell phone by my bed?
And the idea is when we had landlines, you could all hear it when it rang kind of thing. Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Do you have a solution? There's one.
Call me, I'll drive to their house. I'm not going to keep mine.
Okay, here's a comment.
One thought is I believe that iPhones now have settings that if someone calls twice in a row, it will go through Do Not Disturb. And I believe with recent updates, there's also like notify anyway. Of course, that wouldn't help if you were sleeping in the opposite room as your phone, but there are better ways now to kind of get through that layer of do not disturb or silencing your phone.
So what parents can do now, more experience in the real world, ages 13 through 18, increase mobility even on buses, subways, walking places, etc. And as the child grows, so do the boundaries, right? So once they've mastered this area, maybe we give them a little more area. Expecting more from your teen at home, I think this is really important. One of the things that Jeff and I talk about some with our teenagers we work with is that it's very hard to find teenagers sometimes who have things to be proud of, right? They're not contributing much. They're just kind of consuming and not contributing. I think it's very important. It's not just about making sure they're doing their part. It's about giving them some ownership, giving them things to be proud of. So instilling a work ethic, staving off a feeling of uselessness, making sure they understand I'm a valuable part of this family. Like I'm being given a responsibility, and if I don't do it, then the whole group kind of suffers, right? Encourage your teen to work a part-time job. Obviously, there are tons of skills we can learn on a job that we can't learn any other way.
Find ways for them to nurture and lead others. This core group experience, use our teens to nurture other teens, like many of the ways we do that here as a youth ministry. Encourage bigger thrills in nature. So things like Trek, which kids report such an awesome experience at Trek, and they didn't have their phones. They were alone for a while on the mountain. I don't know how long of a while. How long are they alone? Wow, that's a long time. So that's cool. And they maybe get a taste of it. Consider a gap year after high school for a work or service experience. Let me say on behalf of Harding University, I think that's a terrible idea. Actually, I think it's a good idea. We have about an 87% retention rate from fall to sophomore year, which is pretty good. That means 13% of those students are not coming back for their sophomore year, and probably some of them shouldn't.
But that's a high rate. Most colleges are much lower than that, from freshman to sophomore.
But you know that some 18-year-olds aren't ready for college. They're just not mature enough for college. But you think, what if they never go to college? Oh no! Some of you didn't go to college and it turned out okay. But what'd you say?
I said that's a good impression of a concerned parent.
That's my impression of everyone. So.
All right, so the new norms for collective action, we're just resharing these. We've shared them before. Haidt knows it's very difficult and he says this over and over, a very compassionate way, that implementing these by yourself, we all know what this is like. I'm assuming that all of you who are parents are trying to raise their kids in a way that feels different, right? And it can be very lonely. It can make your kids feel really lonely. He knows this, and this is why he says we got to do this together. We got to find groups of parents who are willing to do this together. And also, just some collective actions that we're going to add to the list. We've already gone through some of these polls, but I think Marcus has brought up a couple of really important points, and we're just sharing like what Haidt's work and what we wish could change. But it's also true that the world has changed, and I think one of the things that's really hard is how much do we change with the world and adjust, and how much do we say, no, we're going to stick to this, right? And that's a hard thing. And I think as long as we're having those conversations together in an honest way, we're making progress.
One more note here about phones in our rooms. This is Haidt. Most of my college students, he teaches business at New York University. Most of my college students say the last thing they do at night, before closing their eyes is to check their texts and social media accounts. I will say the last thing I do at night is check the weather to see how warmly we have to dress for our early morning walk. But it's also the first thing they do in the morning before getting out of bed. Don't let your children develop this habit. And we would say we ourselves should break that habit. If we have that habit, let's break the habit. Let's go to the next poll. I will enforce a strict no screens policy in my kids/teens room. Of course, a lot of you don't have kids or teens anymore. You have grandchildren. Some of you are actually sitting here with your kids. A few of you, not many of you. Yes, I'm open to what? I don't know what that means. I don't know. That seems hard to implement. There's another mistake. To implement, but in the future, maybe not now. I think it shortened my answers. No, that's way too strict. But it sounds like a lot of you, maybe a lot of us who aren't actually parenting teens at the moment, are saying, yeah, we're open to that. We're open to telling our adult children who have teenagers about this. I will enforce a strict no screens policy in my kids' teens room. Will you enforce it in your own room? If you're in your 60s and 70s and 50s and 40s. Next poll.
This was a recommendation I really liked because it feels extreme, right? Like, to just say, I'm going to turn off my phone. So I've just noticed in my own habits, and I need to do this again, but when I remove certain problematic apps from my phone and I can only access it through a desktop when I'm at it, that helps me a lot. So that is one possible thing, like removing the actual social media apps. You still have the account, right? Or like if you're a backgammon addict, you could remove your backgammon app, or if you were like, if shopping is a thing, maybe you remove Amazon from your phone so you can still access it, but it's a lot harder when it's only on your desktop. So that was I thought that was a really kind of rational, kind of in between. So, yeah.
Did you hear the audible gasp when you said remove Amazon from your phone?
One of them was mine, probably. It's a scary thought.
If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. That sounds like a pretty radical thing to do. Removing an app from your phone sounds like a pretty radical thing to do. I had YouTube app on my phone for a while because in class these days, I have this huge collection of VHS tapes, the little snippets from different world religions I use in world religions class. And then I went to DVDs, and now I don't even have a way to play a DVD in my classroom. So I had to go to YouTube, and since I use YouTube so much and showing clips in those classes, I had a YouTube app on my phone. And then YouTube was suggesting that I watch this and watch that, and I think, I shouldn't be watching that. Why did they even propose that? So I deleted the YouTube app. But there are other apps on my phone I could do without. I'm glad that I'm willing to remove addictive apps. 119 of you said, I will take the challenge and try it for the month of January, or I will try it for a week of my choosing, or I just can't commit to that. It's too hard. There's mine.
That's your impression of someone who thinks it's too hard. That's good, Dad.
Is there one more?
Yes, there's one more. So I would love to join others in our church to take collective action to limit our screen time, hold each other accountable, etc. So this is good. So we know this is just like a jumping off conversation. And I think, again, there's too much to cover. And if we're serious about making long-term change, then we need to be having an ongoing conversation. So ironically, we do have a Facebook page. I know. Because social media can be really good for things, right? So we started one. I believe it's called, there it is, DC Collective Action for the Anxious Generation. If you ask to join our group, then we'll add you. And this is just a place where anyone can just get on there and say, you know what? I took that challenge from class in January, and here's the good that came out of it. Here's maybe why it wasn't practical, right? We're just being really honest about what can we actually do collectively. So if you would like to join that, we'd love to have you. We want this to keep going for sure.
Last slide. Back to what Haidt said, what others have observed. Pascal said it centuries ago. Many others have made the same observation. I think the Lord God would say, I created you for a relationship with me. And if you don't have that, then you're going to find there's a void in your soul that you will fill with something. Haidt's version of this is there is a hole and emptiness in us all that we strive to fill. If it doesn't get filled with something noble and elevated, then modern society will quickly pump it full of garbage, so he says. Rachel alluded last week to a passage from Galatians 5 that maybe a fresh hearing out of the message will help us appreciate that content.
So I discovered
this.
The message at a time when my faith was pretty dead. And it honestly taught me to learn the Bible, to love the Bible again, because it helped me to see things in a new light. And one of those passages that I felt the most just kind of blown away by was the Message's version of Galatians 5. And I keep referencing it in this class, and it felt like a really good way to end kind of this conversation for now. He's talking about the fruits of the Spirit. And we've talked about how the phone itself, the technology, is not the villain, right? That these tendencies in human nature have existed for a long time, but that these things just make it even more accessible for us, right? So here is what Galatians 5 says. It is obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. Would we agree that technology, smartphones have made that easier to get our own way all the time? Whatever we want on our front door in 2 days, right? Whatever pornographic images we need to see. Here's what he says that we get. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, I'm thinking of so many of the TikTok videos my students are watching. Frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness. Trinket gods. Magic show religion. Paranoid loneliness, the kind that comes from being on social media all night. Cutthroat competition. All-consuming yet never satisfied wants. A brutal temper. And impotence to love and be loved. I'm thinking about what pornography does. An impotence to love and be loved. Divided homes and divided lives. People who are in their different rooms on their private devices, not interacting with each other. Small-minded and lopsided pursuits. Kind of garbage things that we focus on instead of what matters. The vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival. Uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, and then again, ugly parodies of community. I think that's a powerful one. I could go on. This isn't the first time I've warned you, you know. If you use your freedom in this way, you will not inherit God's kingdom, and I would say his kingdom here on earth now, right? But what happens when we live in God's way? He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, and serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. Legalism is helpless in bringing this about. It only gets in the way. Among those who belong to Christ, everything connected with getting our own way and mindlessly responding to what everyone else calls necessities is killed off for good, crucified.
God help us do the right thing. On behalf of myself and Rachel, thank you so much for joining our class. Go buy the book and you'll get more out of it.